The massive command vessel Dominator's Pride hung in the void like a steel cathedral, its hull scarred from a dozen campaigns across 3 spiral arms. General Kethver stood before the wide viewing port in his private quarters, watching the small human transport dock with his ship. The Zilani military commander's 4 arms crossed in a gesture that his species used to show deep skepticism. "A single human," he muttered to his aide, Commander Zeltith. "The Galactic Defense Council sends us 1 primitive to teach my elite forces advanced combat tactics." Zeltith consulted his datapad with nervous energy. "General, the human's credentials are ... unusual, Staff Sergeant Marcus Chun, formerly of something called the United States Marine Corps Force Reconnaissance. His file shows extensive experience in what humans term asymmetric warfare and unconventional tactics." Kethver's upper right arm waved dismissively. "Humans have been spacefaring for barely 2 centuries. My people have waged war among the stars for over 3 millennia. What could this primitive possibly teach soldiers who have conquered 17 worlds?" The transport finished docking procedures, and soon the door chimed. "Enter," Kethver commanded, expecting to see a delegation. Instead, a single human walked through the door. Marcus Chun stood just under 6 feet tall, which made him average height among his own species but noticeably shorter than most galactic races. His dark hair was cut in a precise military style, and his brown eyes seemed to take in every detail of the room instantly. He wore a simple gray uniform with minimal insignia, nothing like the elaborate dress uniforms favored by most galactic military officers. "General Kethver," Marcus said, offering a crisp salute. "Staff Sergeant Chun reporting for training assignment." Kethver studied the human for a long moment. "You're smaller than I expected." "Size isn't everything, General. Often the smallest forces can achieve the greatest victories when properly applied." "Indeed." Kethver's secondary arms gestured toward chairs arranged near his desk. "Sit. Tell me, human, what makes you qualified to train my elite battalions?" "My soldiers have fought in campaigns that would break lesser species. They have taken fortified positions that other races deemed impregnable." Marcus remained standing. "With respect, General, I prefer to show you rather than tell you. When do we begin training exercises?" "You are eager." "Very well. Tomorrow at dawn cycle you will observe my 1st Battalion in combat drills. Perhaps watching real warriors will give you perspective on what you're dealing with." "Actually, General, I was hoping I could run the exercise myself." "Give your forces a scenario to work through." Kethver's laugh was a harsh sound like grinding metal. "Human, my 1st Battalion has never lost a training exercise. They are the finest soldiers in the Zilani Empire. You want to design a scenario for them? If you're willing to trust me with them for 1 day." The general's 4 eyes narrowed. "Very well. 1 day. When they complete your exercise in record time, perhaps you'll understand the quality of troops you're dealing with." "Fair enough, General. I'll need access to your training facility specifications and a list of available equipment. Commander Zeltoth will provide whatever you require." After Marcus left with the aide, Kethver returned to the viewport. He had agreed to this human trainer as a political necessity. The Galactic Defense Council wanted all member species to share tactical knowledge, and the humans had recently joined after their impressive performance against the Kraxi Raiders. Still, Kethver expected this to be a short, somewhat amusing demonstration of human NAIVATY. The next morning, Kethver arrived at Training Complex 7 to find his 1st Battalion assembled in full combat gear. These were his best soldiers, veterans of multiple campaigns, each standing over 7 feet tall with the natural armor plating that made Zilani such formidable warriors. Battalion Commander Velenuk approached the general. "Sir, the human has set up some kind of urban combat scenario. It looks ... simple." Kethver surveyed the training area. Marcus had arranged a series of buildings and obstacles to create what appeared to be a small city district. Nothing elaborate, certainly nothing his experienced soldiers hadn't seen before. Marcus appeared beside them, seemingly from nowhere. Both Zilani officers startled slightly at his silent approach. "Gentlemen," Marcus said, "today's exercise is straightforward. Your battalion needs to secure this urban area and extract a high-value target from the central building. The target is a civilian who has critical intelligence about enemy positions. Simple rescue and secure operation. Commander Velenak's mandibles clicked with amusement. Human, we have conducted hundreds of such operations. This will take perhaps 30 minutes. We'll see. I should mention there are a few defensive positions in the area. Nothing your people can't handle, I'm sure. Kethver waved one arm. Begin when ready, Commander. The 1st Battalion moved out with practiced efficiency. They had done this type of operation countless times. The soldiers advanced in perfect formation, their heavy weapons ready, communication flowing smoothly between squads. Then everything went wrong. The first squad to enter the urban area triggered what appeared to be a simple, improvised explosive device. Nothing dangerous in a training scenario, but it disabled their heavy weapons specialist and created debris that forced them to change their approach route. As they adapted, sniper fire began picking off soldiers from unexpected angles. Commander Velenak studied the situation through his tactical display. Where are these snipers positioned? His communications officer shook his head. Unknown, sir. We cannot locate the firing positions. What should have been a quick operation began stretching into hours. Every time the battalion adapted to one challenge, new problems emerged. Hidden traps, unexpected defensive positions, and constantly shifting sniper fire kept them off balance. The human had apparently seeded the training area with holographic enemies that appeared and disappeared in patterns that made no tactical sense to Zelani military doctrine. This is impossible. Velenak muttered as his 3rd attempt to reach the central building failed. No military force would set up defenses this way. It violates every principle of concentrated firepower and defensive lines. Watching from the command post, Kethver found himself leaning forward with interest. His elite soldiers were struggling against a scenario designed by a single human. More concerning, they seemed unable to adapt their tactics to meet the challenge. Human, Kethver called to Marcus. What kind of enemy force are you simulating here? Insurgents, General. Fighters who don't have the luxury of proper equipment or formal training. People who have to win through creativity and asymmetric tactics, because they can't match their enemies in direct confrontation. This is not how civilized warfare is conducted. Marcus looked at the general with those steady brown eyes. With respect, sir, your enemies won't always be civilized. By the end of the day, the 1st Battalion had finally completed their objective, but it had taken them over 6 hours and cost them 40% casualties in the simulation. Commander Velenak approached the command post with his pride clearly wounded. The scenario was challenging, he admitted. How would you have done it differently? Marcus asked. Velenak hesitated. I am not certain. Our standard tactics seemed inadequate. That's because you're thinking like soldiers fighting other soldiers. Sometimes you need to think like hunters or survivors or desperate people who have no other choice. Tomorrow, I'd like to run your people through some exercises that will help them develop that mindset. Kethver studied the human with new interest. You have our attention, Staff Sergeant Chun. Show us more. That evening, as Kethver reviewed the day's exercises, he realized something uncomfortable. His elite forces had been outmaneuvered not by superior technology or numbers, but by an entirely different way of thinking about combat. The human had forced them to confront scenarios their traditional training had never prepared them for. For the first time since the human had arrived, General Kethver was genuinely curious about what tomorrow would bring. His certainty about human primitiveness was beginning to crack. Replaced by something that might have been respect, the small human had given his best soldiers a thorough challenge using nothing but creativity and unconventional thinking. If this was just the beginning of what Marcus Chun had to teach, Kethver suspected the coming days would test everything he thought he knew about warfare. The second day began before dawn cycle with an announcement that shocked the entire 1st Battalion. Staff Sergeant Chun had requested that all soldiers report to training in civilian clothing, carrying only basic personal equipment. No weapons, no armor, no communication devices beyond simple radio units. This is highly irregular. Commander Velenak protested as he stood in the corridor outside General Kethver's quarters. My soldiers are trained warriors, not civilians? Kethver considered the request. Yesterday's exercise had left him with uncomfortable questions about his force's adaptability. Grant his request, Commander. Let us see where this human leads. An hour later, the 1st Battalion stood in the training complex wearing simple gray uniforms that could belong to any civilian worker in the galaxy. They looked diminished without their usual impressive armor and weapons. Just tall Zilani in ordinary clothes, Marcus appeared among them wearing identical clothing, but somehow he still projected an air of quiet authority that made the alien soldiers pay attention. Today we're going to learn about fieldcraft, Marcus announced. The art of surviving and operating behind enemy lines without support, without proper equipment, and without the advantages you're used to having. He gestured to the training area, which had been reconfigured to look like a civilian settlement. Your mission is to gather intelligence on enemy positions, sabotage 3 critical infrastructure points, and extract without being detected. You have basic tools, civilian identities, and each other. Nothing else. Sergeant Major Korvac, the battalion's most experienced non-commissioned officer, raised one of his 4 arms. Human, this is not how Zilani military doctrine operates. We are assault troops, not spies. Today you're insurgents. People fighting a war they can't win through conventional means. People who have to be smarter and more adaptable than their enemies because raw power isn't an option. Marcus divided the battalion into teams of 5 and assigned each group a different area of the mock settlement. Remember, you're not soldiers today. You're maintenance workers, traders, refugees. If the enemy realizes you're military, you fail. If you're detected during sabotage operations, you fail. If you can't accomplish your mission without compromising your fellow teams, you fail. The exercise began with immediate confusion. Zilani culture valued direct confrontation and obvious displays of strength. The idea of blending in, of appearing weak while secretly gathering information, went against every instinct these soldiers possessed. General Kethver watched from an observation deck as his elite forces struggled with concepts that seemed elementary to the human instructor. Teams of Zilani warriors tried to act like civilian workers and failed spectacularly. Their military bearing was too obvious, their situational awareness too keen, their responses to simulated civilians too precise and formal. This is painful to watch, Commander Zeltoth observed. Educational, Kethver corrected. Though he understood his aide's sentiment. Marcus moved through the training area like a ghost, appearing beside struggling teams to offer guidance. Kethver noted that the human could shift his entire demeanor at will. One moment he would appear to be a maintenance worker, shuffling along with tired shoulders and downcast eyes. The next, he would transform into what appeared to be a trader, confident and engaging. Then he might become a refugee, nervous but determined. How does he do that? Zeltoth asked. Practice, Kethver murmured. Years of practice. By midday, most of the Zilani teams had been captured by the exercise controllers playing enemy security forces. Their attempts at sabotage had been clumsy and obvious. Only one team remained undetected, and they were struggling with their final objective. Marcus called a halt to the exercise and gathered the entire battalion in the center of the training area. The soldiers looked frustrated and demoralized. How many of you have ever had to go hungry for more than a day? Marcus asked. No hands went up. Zilani military logistics were efficient, and soldiers were well supplied. How many have had to sleep rough, without shelter, for a week or more? Again, no response. How many have had to kill an enemy without weapons, using only what you could find around you? The silence stretched uncomfortably. Marcus nodded. Your military is excellent at what it does. You're well-trained, well-equipped, well-supported. But warfare isn't always about being excellent. Sometimes it's about being desperate. Sometimes it's about having no good choices and making the best of bad ones. He gestured for them to sit on the ground. Another break from military protocol that made several soldiers uncomfortable. "Let me tell you about Earth," Marcus continued. "My planet has been at war with itself for most of its history. We've developed a lot of different ways to fight because we've had to. Sometimes we've been the ones with superior technology and training. Sometimes we've been the ones who had to win despite being outnumbered and outgunned." Sergeant Major Korvac spoke up. "Human, you speak of warfare as if it were chaotic and unpredictable. Proper military doctrine provides structure and predictability." "It does until it doesn't," Marcus replied. "What happens when your doctrine meets an enemy who doesn't follow any doctrine at all? What happens when your well-trained soldiers face desperate civilians who are willing to die to protect their homes?" He stood and walked to a wall covered with tactical displays. "Your people have conquered 17 worlds. How many of those worlds stayed conquered without continuous military occupation?" The question hung in the air. Commander Velenak eventually answered, "Most required ... ongoing security measures. Insurgencies," Marcus said. "Local populations that couldn't match your military in open battle, but could make occupation costly through irregular warfare. How many Zelani soldiers have died not in great battles, but in small ambush, improvised explosions, and unexpected attacks by enemies who melted away before you could respond?" The discomfort among the assembled soldiers was obvious. This was an aspect of warfare they rarely discussed in formal settings. "That's what I'm trying to teach you," Marcus continued. "Not just how to fight irregulars, but how to think like them. How to be resourceful when resources are limited. How to adapt when your standard procedures don't apply. How to win when winning seems impossible." He gestured back toward the training area. "Let's try the exercise again, but this time I want you to think differently. Don't think like soldiers. Think like people who have no choice but to succeed despite overwhelming odds." The second attempt went better. The Zelani teams began to understand that success meant being unnoticed rather than impressive. They learned to move with less precision, to appear disorganized while maintaining actual coordination, to accomplish their objectives through patience rather than overwhelming force. As evening approached, Marcus introduced the most challenging exercise yet. "Final challenge," he announced. "I'm going to hunt all of you. You have 2 hours to evade capture in this training complex using only the skills we've practiced today. No weapons, no armor, no communication devices. If I catch you, you're out. If you can avoid me for the full 2 hours, you win." The soldiers looked skeptical. One human against an entire battalion, even in a training exercise, seemed like poor odds. "What are the rules for the hunter?" Commander Velenak asked. Marcus smiled, and for the first time Kethver noticed something predatory in the human's expression. "Same rules. No weapons, no armor, no communication devices." The hunt began at sunset. General Kethver watched through security cameras as his elite soldiers spread out through the training complex, using every piece of cover and concealment they could find. They moved carefully, applied the lessons from earlier exercises, and seemed confident in their ability to evade one. Human tracker. Marcus disappeared into the complex like smoke. For the first 30 minutes, nothing happened. The soldiers remained hidden, confident that they were successfully avoiding detection. Then the first soldier was captured. The man had been hiding in what seemed like an excellent position behind some shipping containers. But somehow Marcus had found him. "How did the human locate Trooper Zendar?" Kethver asked the exercise controller monitoring the situation. "Unknown, sir. The human appeared to know exactly where he was hiding." Over the next hour, soldiers began disappearing from the exercise at a steady pace. Marcus seemed to move through the training complex like he had some kind of supernatural knowledge of where everyone was hiding. He didn't search randomly. He moved with purpose toward each hiding spot as if he could see through walls. "This is impossible," Commander Zeltoth muttered as another soldier was eliminated. "How can one person track an entire battalion?" By the end of 2 hours, only 3 soldiers remained undetected. The rest of the 1st Battalion stood in the center of the complex. Looking shocked and somewhat humiliated, Marcus emerged from the shadows to address the group. "Good effort," he said, and he sounded like he meant it. The three who lasted the full time showed real improvement in fieldcraft. Sergeant Major Korvac stepped forward. "Human, I must ask, how did you locate so many of us so quickly?" "Experience," Marcus replied, "and understanding what to look for. Most of you were thinking like soldiers trying to hide. But soldiers have habits, patterns of thinking that are predictable if you know what to watch for. The few who succeeded started thinking like civilians trying to." The third day arrived with an atmosphere of nervous anticipation throughout the 1st Battalion. Word had spread about the previous day's hunting exercise, and soldiers who had never questioned their military superiority now approached their human instructor with visible wariness. Marcus stood in the center of the training complex, which had been cleared of all equipment except for basic exercise mats. He wore the same simple gray uniform as the soldiers, but somehow managed to project an aura of quiet confidence that made even the largest Solani warriors shift uncomfortably. "Today we focus on personal combat," Marcus announced. "Fighting when you have no weapons, no armor, and no advantages except your training and will to survive." Commander Velenek stepped forward. His forearms crossed in a gesture that displayed both skepticism and barely contained aggression. "Human, with respect, Zolani physiology provides natural advantages in hand-to-hand combat. We stand 7 feet tall, possess natural armor plating, and have 4 arms to your 2. "All valid points," Marcus agreed. "Would you like to demonstrate those advantages?" The challenge hung in the air like electricity. General Kethver watched from the observation deck, leaning forward with interest. His commander was an experienced warrior who had personally killed enemies in close combat during 3 different campaigns. The man stood nearly 2 feet taller than the human and possessed the natural physical advantages of his species. "Very well," Velenek replied, moving on to the nearest mat. "I will try not to injure you severely." Marcus positioned himself across from the Zolani commander, adopting a relaxed stance that looked almost casual. "Whenever you're ready, Commander." Velenek attacked with the straightforward aggression that characterized Zolani combat doctrine. He lunged forward, forearms reaching to grapple the smaller opponent, intending to use his size and strength advantage to end the demonstration quickly. What happened next lasted barely 3 seconds. But it fundamentally changed how every soldier in that room thought about combat. Marcus stepped slightly to one side, grabbed one of Velenek's arms, and used the commander's own momentum to send him crashing to the mat. The move was so smooth and efficient that many observers weren't sure exactly what they had witnessed. Velenek lay stunned for a moment before struggling back to his feet, his pride more injured than his body. "Again," he demanded. The second attempt lasted even less time. Marcus seemed to barely move, but somehow the commander found himself flat on his back again, this time with the human's hand positioned at his throat in a way that clearly demonstrated how easily a killing blow could be delivered. "How?" Velenek gasped. "Leverage, timing, and understanding that strength can be turned against itself," Marcus replied, helping the commander to his feet. "Your people fight like your natural advantages will always give you the upper hand. But what happens when you face someone who doesn't fight the same way?" Marcus gestured for the entire battalion to gather around. Commander Velenek did everything right according to standard Zolani combat doctrine. He used his reach, his strength, his natural weapons, but he also made assumptions about how the fight would go. Sergeant Major Korvac spoke up. "What kind of assumptions?" "That I would try to match his strength with strength. That I would fight the way he expected me to fight. That the larger, stronger opponent would naturally win." Marcus walked around the circle of soldiers. Human combat doctrine developed differently because we couldn't rely on being the biggest or strongest. We had to learn to win through technique, adaptability, and using our opponent's advantages against them. He demonstrated the techniques he had used on Velenek, breaking them down into components that the Zolani soldiers could understand and practice. The movements looked simple when performed slowly, but the soldiers quickly discovered that executing them correctly required precision, timing, and a completely different mindset than they were used to. "This is not just about physical technique," Marcus explained as pairs of soldiers attempted to practice the moves. It's about changing how you think about conflict. Stop trying to overpower your opponent. Start trying to redirect their power. General Kethver descended to the training floor to observe more closely. He watched his elite soldiers struggle with concepts that challenged their fundamental assumptions about combat. More concerning, he realized these techniques were not just theoretical exercises. In real combat situations, the ability to fight effectively without weapons or armor could mean the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure. As the morning progressed, Marcus introduced increasingly complex scenarios. Soldiers had to defend themselves while protecting simulated civilians. They had to neutralize opponents without killing them. They had to fight multiple enemies using nothing but improvised weapons found in their environment. "This is exhausting," one soldier admitted during a brief rest period. "I feel like my brain is working harder than my body." "Combat fatigue," Marcus nodded. "Mental exhaustion from constantly adapting to unexpected situations. It's normal. Your minds are learning to process tactical information in ways they never had to before." The afternoon brought the final challenge. Marcus announced that he would personally spar with any soldier who wanted to test their new skills. The volunteers would attack him using any technique they chose, and he would demonstrate how to counter and neutralize their efforts. One by one, soldiers stepped forward. Each encounter was a brief lesson in the difference between raw physical ability and refined combat skill. Marcus never appeared to use excessive force, but every opponent found themselves controlled and defeated with minimal effort. "It's like fighting smoke," one soldier observed after his attempt. "He's never where you expect him to be." The final volunteer was Sergeant Major Korvac, the battalion's most experienced combat veteran. The elderly Zelani approached the combat mat with visible determination and a lifetime of tactical knowledge. "I have killed enemies in 7 different star systems," Korvac announced. "I will not be defeated so easily as the others." "I respect your experience, Sergeant Major," Marcus replied. "Show me what you've learned." The fight lasted longer than any previous encounter. Korvac used every technique he had practiced that day, combined with decades of combat experience. He adapted his attacks, varied his approach, and demonstrated genuine tactical thinking. Marcus was forced to work harder than before, moving with fluid precision to counter the veteran's increasingly sophisticated assault. But the outcome remained the same. After nearly 2 minutes of intense combat, Korvac found himself pinned to the mat with Marcus's forearm across his throat. "Excellent effort, Sergeant Major," Marcus said, helping the older soldier to his feet. "You adapted quickly and forced me to use techniques I hadn't needed earlier." Korvac stood, breathing heavily, but his expression showed respect rather than embarrassment. "Human, I begin to understand why the Galactic Defense Council values your species' tactical knowledge." As the training day concluded, General Kethver addressed his assembled soldiers. "What have you learned during these 3 days of instruction?" Commander Velenik answered first. "That our assumptions about military superiority were based on facing enemies who fought like us. That adaptation and flexibility can overcome raw physical advantages," added Sergeant Major Korvac. That we have been thinking too narrowly about what constitutes effective military doctrine," another soldier contributed. Kethver nodded. "Staff Sergeant Chun, you have given my forces something I did not expect. You have shown them their own limitations and provided tools to overcome those limitations." Marcus faced the general. "Your soldiers are excellent, General. They just needed exposure to different ways of thinking about warfare. In a galaxy full of diverse species and unpredictable threats, flexibility might be the most valuable military asset of all." That evening, General Kethver met privately with Marcus in his quarters. The events of the past 3 days had shaken his confidence in everything he thought he understood about military doctrine and human capabilities. "Staff Sergeant, I must ask you something directly," Kethver said. "How long did it take humans to develop these unconventional warfare techniques?" "Thousands of years, General. We've been fighting each other, surviving in hostile environments, and adapting to threats since before we discovered fire. These skills weren't developed in military academies. They came from necessity. And every human possesses this adaptability? Marcus considered the question carefully. Every human grows up in a culture that values survival through adaptation. We're taught from childhood that intelligence and creativity can overcome physical disadvantages. It becomes part of how we think. Cuthbert stood and walked to his viewing port, looking out at the stars. My people have been warriors for 3 millennia, but we have always been the strongest, the best equipped, the most advanced. We never learned to fight when we weren't winning. That's not necessarily a weakness, General, but it can become one if you never prepare for different kinds of conflicts. Indeed. Cuthbert turned back to face the human. I owe you an apology, Staff Sergeant. When you arrived, I expected to humor a primitive warrior for a few days before sending you home with polite thanks. Instead, you have completely reorganized my understanding of military effectiveness. You've been very open to new ideas,